I had just finished transplanting the last of my heirloom tomato seedlings when I spotted her marching across my lawn, clipboard in hand, face set in that expression I'd come to recognize from a mile away. The dreaded HOA patrol had arrived, and its general was on a mission. "Excuse me, Mr. Norris!" Karen Wilcox's voice carried across my front yard like a foghorn. As the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, she wielded her power like a medieval lord, absolute and merciless. I stood slowly, my back protesting after hours of gardening. At 42, I wasn't old, but working the land took its toll, even when that land was just a modest acre surrounding my house. Still, as County Agriculture Commissioner for the past 3 years, I considered it my duty to maintain an exemplary garden. "Good morning, Karen," I said, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Something I can help you with?" Karen Wilcox, mid-50s, impeccable blonde bob, and dressed in a crisp pantsuit despite the weekend, stopped at the edge of my vegetable garden and surveyed it with the distaste one might reserve for a pile of garbage. "Mr. Iverson, this eyesore cannot continue." She tapped her pen against her clipboard. "We've received multiple complaints about your front yard. This is a violation of HOA Covenant Section 4.3. I looked around at my garden. Raised beds of vegetables lined the southern exposure of my front yard, each neatly maintained with wood chip paths between them. A small greenhouse sat in the corner, and several fruit trees, still young but healthy, were espaliered against my fence. "Which part specifically violates the covenant?" I asked, genuinely curious. I'd read the HOA guidelines thoroughly before planting. "All of it." She gestured dramatically. "Vegetable gardens belong in backyards out of sight. Front yards must maintain aesthetic continuity with the neighborhood, which means grass, approved ornamental plants, and nothing that looks like a farm." I took a deep breath. "Karen, I reviewed the bylaws before installing this garden. There's nothing prohibiting food cultivation in the front yard as long as it's maintained. The board has recently reinterpreted Section 4.3, she said, her voice taking on that smug tone that made my neighbors cringe. "As president, I have discretion to determine what constitutes an eyesore. The board meeting last week unanimously decided that vegetable gardens in front yards detract from property values." I frowned. "I wasn't notified of any meeting." "It was an emergency session." She smiled thinly. "You have 1 week to remove all this and restore proper landscaping, or you'll be fined $100 per day." As she handed me the violation notice, I noticed something odd. The paper wasn't the usual HOA letterhead, it looked hastily printed, and the board's signatures were all in the same handwriting. "I'd like to see the minutes from this emergency session," I said, folding the notice. Karen's smile faltered for just a second before returning. "They'll be in next month's newsletter. 1 week, Mr. Iverson. And I suggest you start today." As she walked away, I noticed her pause to take pictures of my garden with her phone. Something felt off about the whole interaction. I'd attended every HOA meeting for the past year, and there had been no discussions about changing landscape policies. In fact, several neighbors had complimented my garden and asked for growing tips. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Ellie Ortega, who served as HOA treasurer. "Hey, Ellie. Quick question, was there an emergency HOA board meeting last week?" Her confusion was evident. "No, nothing scheduled since last month's regular meeting." "Why?" I explained Karen's visit, and Ellie's exasperation came through clearly. "Nick, she's been on a power trip ever since she became president. There was no meeting, and no vote on garden policies. I'll look into it." After hanging up, I stared at the violation notice again. This wasn't the first time Karen had overstepped her authority, but it was the first time she'd targeted me directly. As County Agriculture Commissioner, I'd been working to promote sustainable urban farming and water-wise landscaping throughout our drought-prone region. My garden wasn't just a hobby, it was a demonstration site I used for community education. That evening, while watering my threatened vegetable beds, my neighbor Tom walked over from across the street. "Heard Karen came by today," he said, leaning on my fence. She's been telling everyone your garden violates some new rule. Apparently, I replied. Though it seems the new rule might just be in her head. Tom snorted. Wouldn't be the first time. You know she fined the Johnsons for their Ukrainian flag? Said it wasn't an approved national flag in the bylaws. They're from Ukraine and have family in the war zone. I shook my head. What happened? They took it down. Couldn't afford the fines. Tom looked at my garden. You fighting this one? You bet I am. I hadn't planned to make a stand, but something about this situation made my blood boil. I've got a feeling there's more to this than just aesthetic preferences. What I didn't tell Tom was that I'd started making calls. As County Agriculture Commissioner, I had contacts in local government who could help me navigate this situation. But I wanted to understand Karen's real motivation first. The next morning, Sunday, I decided to do some reconnaissance. Karen lived 4 houses down on the opposite side of the street, a large colonial with the only perfect lawn in our water-restricted community. I walked my dog past her house, noticing a strange van in her driveway with Valley View Landscaping painted on the side. As I passed, I overheard Karen speaking to a man in the driveway. Once the demonstration garden is gone, we can move forward with the rest of the neighborhood. These drought-resistant landscapes are cutting into our business. She lowered her voice, but I still caught. Don't worry, Marcus. I'll deliver what I promised. The contract will be worth the commission. I walked on before they noticed me, my mind racing. Karen's husband owned Wilcox Realty, the largest real estate company in the county. What connection did they have to a landscaping business? When I got home, I called my assistant at the Agriculture Commission office. Emily, I need you to pull any county contracts with Valley View Landscaping. Also, check if they've submitted bids for the new community garden project. While waiting for Emily's research, I decided to review our HOA bylaws again. The supposed Section 4.3 that Karen had cited actually concerned holiday decorations, not landscaping. The landscaping section, 7.2, explicitly encouraged drought-resistant and native plantings, as long as they were maintained in a neat and orderly fashion. I was still puzzling over this when Ellie called. Nick, you're not going to believe this. I checked our HOA accounts, and Karen's been paying Valley View Landscaping $1,500 monthly from our funds for community maintenance. But they don't do any work in our common areas. We have a contract with Green Thumb Services for that. Does the board approve these payments? That's the thing, they're listed as pre-approved operational expenses that don't require board review. But I can't find any contract or service agreement documenting what they're supposed to be doing. This was getting interesting. Any connection between Karen and Valley View? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. After hanging up, I noticed a group text from several neighbors expressing concern about receiving similar violation notices for their landscaping. Karen was apparently on a crusade, targeting anyone with something other than a traditional grass lawn. Monday morning, I put on my official County Agriculture Commissioner blazer and headed to my office. By noon, Emily had compiled what I needed. Valley View Landscaping is owned by Marcus Phillips, she reported. They've bid on 3 county projects in the last year, including the Community Garden Initiative, but haven't won any contracts because their bids were significantly higher than competitors. Any connection to Karen Wilcox? Emily handed me a folder. Marcus Phillips is Karen Wilcox's brother-in-law, her husband's brother. And here's where it gets interesting. Valley View submitted a new proposal last week for landscape renovation services for the entire Whispering Pines subdivision, claiming they already have HOA approval. I whistled. How much? $478,000 for conversion of all non-compliant yards to standard turf and ornamental landscaping. During a drought emergency? When the county is offering rebates for removing turf? Emily nodded. The proposal specifically mentions eliminating unauthorized vegetable gardens and excessive native plant installations to restore property values. Now Karen's motivation was becoming clear. She was trying to secure a massive contract for her brother-in-law's company, using her HOA authority to manufacture a problem that didn't exist. I spent the afternoon making calls to the county attorney's office and reviewing HOA regulations under state law. By Tuesday morning, I had a plan. When I arrived home Tuesday evening, I found another notice taped to my door, this one threatening immediate fines rather than giving me a week. It also mentioned that the HOA had secured landscaping services to assist homeowners in achieving compliance. I texted Ellie. Emergency neighborhood meeting at my house, tomorrow, 7 p.m. Bring any violation notices you've received. Wednesday evening, 23 neighbors crowded into my living room. Most had received similar notices, all citing the mysterious reinterpretation of HOA rules. I've lived here 15 years, said Mrs. Patel, an elderly woman who had converted her lawn to a beautiful native plant garden. Never had a complaint until now. Karen says my pollinator garden is messy and attracts undesirable insects. Others shared similar stories. The Martinez family had been cited for their rainwater collection system. The Wilsons for their raised vegetable beds. All had been told they needed to restore traditional landscaping. I explained what I'd discovered about Valley View landscaping and Karen's connection to it. The room erupted in angry murmurs. That's a conflict of interest, someone shouted. It's more than that, I replied. Under state law, it's potentially fraud and misappropriation of HOA funds. But before we pursue legal action, I want to try resolving this internally. We formulated a plan. The next day would be the regular monthly HOA meeting, which Karen had conveniently not sent reminders about. We would all attend and confront her with what we knew. As we finished our planning, Ellie pulled me aside. Nick, there's something else you should know. I dug deeper into our accounts. For the past year, Karen has been collecting special assessment fees from new homeowners, $500 each, supposedly for landscape conformity inspection. That money isn't in our accounts. How many new homeowners have paid this fee? At least 15 that I've found so far. That was $7,500 potentially embezzled from the HOA, enough to elevate this from an ethics issue to a criminal one. Thursday evening, Karen looked shocked when instead of the usual 5 or 6 attendees, almost 40 homeowners filled the community center for the HOA meeting. Her usual smug confidence wavered as she called the meeting to order. Before we begin with the agenda, she said, shuffling papers nervously, I want to remind everyone that landscape violation notices must be addressed within the time frame provided. Actually, I said, standing up, I'd like to discuss those notices as our first order of business. Karen's eyes narrowed. Landscape compliance isn't on tonight's agenda, Mr. Iverson. I move to amend the agenda to include discussion of recent landscape citations and the proposed contract with Valley View Landscaping, Ellie said immediately. I second, called another neighbor. Karen's face reddened. There is no proposed contract to discuss. That's interesting, I said, because Valley View Landscaping has submitted a proposal to the county for a $478,000 landscape renovation project for our neighborhood, claiming they already have HOA approval. The room erupted. Karen banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! This meeting will follow proper procedure. When the room quieted, I continued. As many of you know, I serve as the County Agriculture Commissioner. My office oversees agricultural and landscaping initiatives, including drought response. Valley View's proposal directly contradicts county water conservation mandates. This is all a misunderstanding, Karen said, her voice strained. The board has been exploring options to improve neighborhood aesthetics, but no decisions have been made. What board? Ellie asked. Because as treasurer, I've attended every meeting, and this has never been discussed. Nor was there an emergency session last week as you've claimed to multiple homeowners. Karen's face went from red to white. I've been conducting preliminary research on the board's behalf. Is that also why you've been paying Valley View $1,500 monthly from HOA funds without board approval? Ellie asked. A shocked murmur ran through the room. Those are authorized maintenance expenses, Karen snapped. For services we already contract with Green Thumb to provide. Ellie replied. And what about the special assessment fees you've collected from new homeowners? The ones that never made it into our HOA accounts? At this, Karen stood up abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. She grabbed her purse and folder and started for the door. Actually, said a man standing at the back of the room, I'd like you to stay, Mrs. Wilcox. He stepped forward and showed a badge. Detective Sandoval, County Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating financial irregularities in several HOAs, and your name has come up repeatedly. Karen froze, her hand on the door handle. I'm also interested in the relationship between Wilcox Realty, Valley View Landscaping, and the pattern of selective enforcement of HOA regulations against properties not listed with your husband's company. The detective continued. I hadn't known about that last part, but suddenly several pieces clicked into place, including why my next-door neighbor had been pressured to list with Wilcox Realty after receiving multiple HOA violations. Karen turned, her expression now one of panic. This is ridiculous. You have no authority here. Actually, Mrs. Wilcox, we have a warrant to seize HOA financial records and your personal communications related to HOA business. He nodded to two officers who had entered behind him. And given what we've just heard about misappropriation of funds, I believe we have probable cause for additional charges. What followed was something of an anticlimax. Karen was escorted out, not in handcuffs but clearly under investigation. Detective Sandoval explained that they had been building a case for months after complaints from homeowners in several communities where Karen's husband had real estate interests. The landscape violation notices were just the latest scheme, he told us. We believe they've been using HOA regulations to pressure homeowners to sell through Wilcox Realty, then steering buyers toward properties where they could generate additional commissions through landscaping contracts with Valley View. After the detective left with the HOA records, the remaining board members, Ellie and two others, called for an emergency election to replace Karen. I hadn't planned to volunteer, but when several neighbors nominated me, I found myself accepting the role of interim HOA president. My first official act was to rescind all of Karen's landscape violation notices. The second was to invite the county extension office to hold a workshop in our neighborhood on water-wise gardening and edible landscapes. 3 weeks later, I was in my garden harvesting early summer vegetables when Ellie stopped by. Have you heard the latest? She asked, accepting the cucumber I offered her. About Karen? Ellie nodded. The district attorney is filing charges, fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of funds. They found evidence she and her husband have been running this scheme in 4 different HOAs. What about Valley View? Marcus Phillips is cooperating with investigators. Apparently, Karen and her husband were taking a 50% kickback on all the landscaping contracts they steered his way. I shook my head, pulling a weed from between my tomato plants. All this because she couldn't stand a vegetable garden in a front yard. I don't think it was ever about the gardens, Ellie said. It was about control and money. Your garden was just the most visible challenge to her authority, especially given your position. She was right. Karen's mistake wasn't just targeting my garden, it was assuming that her authority as HOA president trumped everything else, including county regulations, state law, and basic ethics. That weekend, we held the first neighborhood garden tour. 15 households opened their yards, front and back, to showcase everything from traditional vegetable gardens to innovative water conservation landscapes. The county extension office provided information on rebates for turf removal, and I gave a short workshop on growing food in small spaces. As I stood in my front yard, surrounded by neighbors admiring my heirloom tomatoes and asking questions about companion planting, I couldn't help but feel that Karen had inadvertently done our community a favor. Her greed had brought us together, and sparked a neighborhood-wide interest in sustainable landscaping. The following Monday, I received a call from the county supervisor. Nick, I've been hearing great things about what's happening in Whispering Pines, she said. How would you feel about expanding your garden tours to other neighborhoods? The board is looking to allocate additional funding for water conservation initiatives, and your community model is exactly what we need to showcase. I looked out my window at Mrs. Patel across the street, carefully tending her pollinator garden, and at the Martinez family installing a new raised bed where their lawn had once been. "I think we'd be delighted to share what we've learned," I replied. "Sometimes the best growth comes after removing a particularly stubborn weed." 2 months later, Karen Wilcox pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Her husband's real estate license was suspended pending further investigation, and Valley View Landscaping closed its doors. But by then, our neighborhood had transformed. Front yards that had once been uniform expanses of thirsty grass were now diverse showcases of edible plants, native flowers, and creative water-saving designs. As the new HOA president, I made sure our bylaws were updated to explicitly encourage sustainable landscaping and home food production. We even established a neighborhood seed library and tool-sharing program. Sometimes I think about sending Karen a thank you note and a basket of my homegrown vegetables. After all, her attempt to remove my garden had not only failed spectacularly but had transformed our entire community for the better. But instead, I just keep doing what I've always done, tending my garden, sharing the harvest, and remembering that even in the smallest spaces, there's always room to grow something good.